The camels smelled it before you did. A change in how they moved, a slight quickening, and then you saw it too, the dark mass of the Caravanserai rising from the plain ahead. It was bigger than you expected. They always are, the first time you see one in the dimming light. 4 walls, thick as the width of a cart, cut from the same pale stone as the plateau itself, so that in certain hours they seemed to belong to the earth rather than to have been built on it. The gate was open. 2 arched passages wide enough for loaded camels to pass in pairs, and above the arch, geometric tile work in deep blue and white that caught the last of the day's light and threw it back cold and sharp. Men were coming in from all directions. From the west, a caravan of perhaps 30 animals, heavily loaded, moving in the slow patient rhythm that is not tiredness, but simply the body settling into its work. From the north, 2 merchants on horseback, with their goods in panniers, riding quickly, wanting to be inside before dark. Your own caravan was 12 camels, which is neither large nor small. Your lead driver had done this road more times than he could number, and he guided the first animal through the gate without needing direction. You followed. The courtyard inside was already half full. Perhaps 100 animals, 150, milling at the troughs and the tied rails that ran along the walls. The noise was considerable. Camels do not stop complaining simply because they have arrived somewhere comfortable. But underneath that, you could already hear other sounds, the low murmur of men settling for the evening, the clatter from the cookfires in the far corner, the soft repetitive knock of a blacksmith still at his work. The air inside the walls was warmer than outside. The stone held the day's heat long after the sun was gone. You stood in the middle of the courtyard for a moment and let the smell of the place come to you, dung and straw and wood smoke, sweat and leather. Spices from someone else's cargo, cardamom perhaps, or pepper. The dense, heavy smell of animal bodies in a confined space, which is not a pleasant smell exactly, but is, after a week on the open plain, the smell of shelter. Your driver was already directing the unloading. You had nothing immediate to do. You were paying him to have nothing immediate to do. So you stood there in the middle of the arriving evening and simply watched the caravanserai fill. Your room was on the upper level. You had a room at all, because you had sent a boy ahead 3 days earlier to reserve it, which is what merchants of any standing did on this road. The ground floor cells were for drivers and servants and men who carried their own goods and did not have the habit or the money for anything better. The upper level ran all the way around the interior wall, a continuous gallery above the animal court, with small chambers opening off it. The chambers were plain. Stone walls, a wooden door that latched but did not lock, a sleeping platform built into the wall with a thin cotton mattress stuffed with wool or cotton waste, a lamp niche cut into the stone beside the door, and that was roughly all. Some of the older caravanserais on the eastern road had more elaborate furnishings, cushioned benches, carpets, windows fitted with wooden screens, but this was a working house on a working road, and it did not pretend to be otherwise. You appreciated that. There was honesty to it. The mattress was clean enough. The blanket folded at the foot was heavy wool, dark blue, and had the faint smell of cedar from whatever chest it had been stored in. You sat on the edge of the sleeping platform for a moment and felt the solidity of the stone beneath the mattress. The lamp in the niche was already lit. Someone, a servant of the house, had come through and lit them all before dark. The flame burned in still air, straight and steady, and the light it cast was small and orange and warm, making the white plaster walls seem almost amber. From below came the sounds of the courtyard, still busy, settling slowly, the animals beginning to quiet as the feeders worked their way down the lines. Above that, on the gallery, footsteps, voices in 3 or 4 languages you could partly identify. A door closing nearby, the smell of food beginning to move through the air from the direction of the kitchen. The kitchen was in the southeast corner of the courtyard, as it always was in the larger houses, far from the stabling and the animal mess, arranged so the smoke went with the prevailing wind. You could smell it long before you reached it. Lamb, probably, with onions and the particular dried herb that grew all through this plateau and that the cooks here added to everything. Flatbread baking on a clay dome, something sweet underneath, figs or dates cooking down in their own syrup. The kitchen itself was a long, low room open to the courtyard on one side, where several large fires burned in stone hearths and pots of various sizes sat at different heights over the coals. 4 cooks worked the fires, moving with the unhurried efficiency of people who have done this every night for years. One man tended the bread, sliding rounds of dough onto the hot surface of the dome with a paddle, watching them with the sideways attention that meant he was counting seconds in his head. Another lifted the lid of a large clay pot, sniffed it, added something from a small jar, replaced the lid. At the far end, 2 men were cutting up a side of lamb with the methodical accuracy that comes from years of practice, their knives moving in steady strokes without any apparent hurry. Around the fires, men sat or stood waiting. This was the common arrangement. You ate what the Caravanserai kitchen provided, paid the fixed price that was set by the house, and were given your portion when it was ready. There was no menu, no choice. The food was what it was, and on this road, it was generally good because the Caravanserais competed for repeat custom, and a merchant who ate badly here would choose a different house on the return journey. You took a place near the fire and let the warmth of it work on your face and hands. After the cold of the plateau, the heat of the kitchen was almost overwhelming, a thick, fragrant pressure. Your eyes watered slightly from the wood smoke. Around you, a low murmur of conversation in Persian Arabic, a language from further east that you could not quite identify. Men who did not share a language doing what people have always done in such situations, making themselves understood through gesture and expression, and the simple goodwill of people who find themselves in the same place at the end of a hard day. The man next to you at the fire was from Samarkand, or said he was, though merchants on this road frequently say they are from the last major city they pass through because it simplifies the conversation. He had a narrow, intelligent face in the hands of a man who worked with small and precise things. Silk, he told you, by way of the fragment of Persian that you shared. He was taking silk west to Baghdad, where the cloth merchants would pay more than he could get anywhere east of the Oxus. He said this with the practiced blankness of a man who does not want you to know how much more. You respected that. He asked what you were carrying. You told him the truth, which is what merchants generally do because lying in these places is more trouble than it is worth. You were carrying lapis lazuli from the mines at Badakhshan in the northeast, deep blue stone shot through with veins of gold. You were taking it west to the ateliers of Baghdad, and from there, if the price was right, further west still to the ports of the Levant, where the Genoese and Venetian traders would pay extraordinary sums for it. The man from Samarkand nodded. He had heard of these mines. He had not seen them. He asked if the stone was as blue as they said. You told him it was more blue than anyone said. He considered this for a moment, then smiled, which was the appropriate response. After supper, which was good, lamb and flatbread and dried fruit and a thick yogurt that had been salted and dried and reconstituted with water, the kind of food that sustains without exciting. There was an hour or so when the men of the Caravanserai sat together in the courtyard without much agenda. Some played a game with pebbles on a scratched board, some mended harness in the firelight, some simply sat and did not talk. This hour, the hour after food and before sleep, was perhaps the strangest and most particular thing about Caravanserai life. Men from enormous distances, carrying goods that were transforming the economies of distant cities, sitting together in a stone courtyard in the middle of a vast plateau, doing not very much at all. You went out to check on the camels before bed, which was a habit from earlier years when you drove the animals yourself and could not trust anyone else to see them right. Now you had drivers who were better at it than you, but the habit persisted. The camels were settled, most of them lying down, their legs folded beneath them in that particular way that looks ungainly from the outside, but which is apparently deeply comfortable to the animal. Your lead camel, the female, turned one enormous eye toward you as you approached and regarded you with the permanent mild disdain that was her default expression. You scratched the coarse fur behind her ear. She tolerated this. The feeders had been thorough, grain and dried alfalfa in the troughs, fresh water available. Everything was exactly as it should be. You lingered there for a moment by the animal warmth. Above you, the sky was extraordinary. The plateau here was at altitude, and the air was dry and clear, in the way that only high desert air is clear, and the stars were simply present in a way that was difficult to convey to anyone who had not stood under them. Not overhead, but everywhere, filling every part of the sky from horizon to horizon, more stars than the eye could take in without moving. Not the few hundred you might see from a city, but thousands, dense and white and very still. The Caravanserai was a system designed to minimize risk, to make the extraordinary ordinariness of long-distance trade possible. You paid a fixed sum. You got a room, food, water, protection, a blacksmith if your metal needed work, a veterinary if your animals were sick, a money changer for the various currencies that accumulated in your wallet as you moved from one region to the next. All of this in 1200, in the middle of the largest landmass on Earth, working with remarkable reliability. You had crossed worse roads, eaten in worse places, slept worse nights. You pulled your cloak tighter and looked at the stars for another minute. Tomorrow you would be back on the road before first light. There was nothing to do about that. For now there was the cold air, and the still sky, and the soft breathing of 100 camels settling into their sleep. Your room was colder when you returned to it. The lamp was still burning, which was something. You pulled the thick wool blanket over your legs and sat for a moment against the wall, listening to the sounds of the Caravanserai at this later hour. Most of the noise had resolved itself into a lower register. The camels had finally quieted, the kitchen fires were banked, the voices on the gallery had gone mostly silent. What remained was the creak of the building itself, stone contracting in the cold, the distant sound of the wind against the outer walls, a low, persistent sound that was not quite whistling, a kind of steady friction. Somewhere, 2 rooms over, someone was coughing, the dry, impatient cough of a man with a chest complaint who has learned to live with it on a long journey. Somewhere below, a door swung once and stopped. These were the ordinary sounds of a sleeping caravanserai, and they were not silence, but they were a kind of rest. The lamp burned lower as the oil in it declined, and the light in the room shifted and softened. The white walls went from amber to a darker gold. The shadows deepened around the corners. You lay back on the sleeping platform and looked at the ceiling, which was plain stone, arched, and in the lamplight, the arch caught a slight warmth that made it less cold than it actually was. Outside, the plateau extended for days in every direction, the same dry, flat ground broken by low ridges of rock, the same pale scrub, the same absolute silence beyond the wind. Inside these walls, perhaps 200 people sleeping or close to sleep, their animals breathing in the courtyard below, their goods piled and covered against the night. And in every cell on this level and the one below, some version of what you were doing. A person from a long distance, lying on a platform of stone with a wool blanket and a failing lamp, about to go to sleep in the middle of a journey that would last several more weeks, and that, if it went well, would end in a transaction that would make all of this worthwhile. If it went well. You did not let yourself think about the if. There is a quality to sleep on the road that is different from sleep at home. At home, there is the particular smell of your own house, your own sheets, the known creaks of floorboards that you have stopped hearing because they are always there. On the road, every surface is unfamiliar, every smell slightly wrong, every sound new enough to register, and yet, after enough nights of it, you stop fighting the strangeness. The body learns. It learns that the sound of camels is not a reason to wake, that the smell of tallow and stone is not a warning, that the cold of a foreign blanket is still warmth against the cold of the air. The body learns, and then it lets go, and sleep comes, even here, even in this small stone room with the thin mattress and the dying lamp, even here at the center of a route that ran from China to the Levant, linking cities whose rulers had never met. Carrying goods that would become paintings, medicines, pigments, flavors, entire technologies transferred from one end of the world to the other without any one person understanding the whole of it. You were a part of that without understanding the whole of it. You knew lapis from Badakhshan, and you knew the ateliers of Baghdad, and you knew the prices that the Venetians paid at the ports of the Levant. You knew your 12 camels and your lead driver and the road between here and there. The rest of it was very large, and you did not need to hold all of it tonight. Tonight, you only needed to hold this small room, this warmth, this soft descent. The lamp went out sometime in the next few minutes. You did not see it go. You were already mostly gone, drifting on that warm current that carries you down from waking into sleep, past the last scattered thoughts of the day, past the image of the stars above the courtyard, past the smell of cardamom and wood smoke and cedar. Down into the dark that is not frightening, but only quiet, only still, only deep. The Caravanserai woke before the sun. In this it was different from a town or a city, where the day begins gradually, person by person, street by street. Here it began all at once, as if the house itself had decided. The drivers were up first, working by lamplight in the courtyard, beginning the long, slow process of preparing the animals for the day. The kitchen fires were lit before the sky showed any gray. The smell of bread already in the air when you opened your door and stepped out onto the gallery. Below you, the courtyard was alive again with the particular kind of organized movement that comes before a departure, purposeful and quiet, each person knowing their role. The man from Samarkand was already at the gate, his silk loaded, his horses standing. He saw you on the gallery and raised one hand, briefly, the gesture of a person with much to do, but who wants to mark the passing of a connection. You raised your hand in return. He went through the gate. You went down to find your drivers and your animals, and to begin the work of loading again, the heavy, patient work of the road. The sky to the east was beginning to lighten. That very early light that has no color yet, only the absence of dark, a gray-blue promise above the line of the plateau. The stars were fading. By the time your caravan was loaded and moving toward the gate, the eastern sky was pale gold, and by the time you passed out onto the open road, a thin line of fire was visible along the horizon. The camels moved with their slow certainty. The road ahead was the same road it had been yesterday. The Caravanserai fell behind you, shrinking back into the plain, becoming again the dark mass it had been when you first saw it the evening before, until the road curved slightly and it was gone. There is a particular kind of peace on a long road in the early morning. The air has a cold clarity that burns off by midday. The light comes in at an angle that makes even flat terrain look sculpted. The animals settle into their rhythm quickly after the stiffness of the night, and the sound of the caravan, the soft padding of camel feet on packed earth, the creak of leather, the low bells some drivers attach to their lead animals, becomes a kind of music, repetitive and hypnotic. You did not think about the journey ahead in its entirety. That was one of the first things you learned on this road. Do not think about the whole journey. Think about the day's march. Think about the next caravanserai, 3 days ahead or 4, the one at the base of the pass. Think about water, where it would be available and where it would not. Think about the animals, which ones were moving well and which ones would need to be watched. These were manageable thoughts. The rest, the distance, the week still ahead, the uncertainty of markets, the possibility of bandit roads or difficult passes or political instability in whatever city you were approaching, all of that was too large to carry effectively. You left it at the edges of your attention and kept the center clear. The morning light spread across the plateau. The eastern sky went from gold to a bright pale blue. Your shadow stretched long ahead of you and then began to shorten. The day had begun properly. Another day on the road, another day of this ancient and ordinary commerce, carrying beautiful stone from the mountains of the northeast toward the cities of the west, where people who had never seen those mountains would grind the stone into the finest blue pigment in the world and spread it onto the surfaces of things, manuscripts and mosaics and paintings and devotional objects, and it would be beautiful there, very beautiful. Far from the mine, and far from the plateau, and far from the caravanserai where you had slept, a deep particular blue that carried, for anyone who knew how to read it, the whole long distance of the road.